Good morning. The Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation will come to order. Today we're here to talk about stopping deadly drugs from crossing our maritime borders. But you cannot stop illegal drugs from crossing a border if you don't believe in having them. The Biden administration and former DHS Secretary Mayorkas deliberately ignored the painful connection between their open border policies and the devastation wrought by illegally trafficked drugs on families, communities, and our country. Trying to have a country without borders led to an influx of illegal aliens, drug smuggling, sex trafficking, and tragically, far too many American lives lost. That dereliction of basic sovereignty left the Coast Guard in an impossible position. The Coast Guard has admitted it missed opportunities to intercept drugs because it was overwhelmed chasing and catching illegal immigrants. Despite the Biden administration's lack of interest in border security, Republicans were able to make some progress. In the Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2022, I secured funding for a blimp-based radar system at South Padre Island to combat drug runners, poachers, and human traffickers. Today, it is still protecting South Texas. Similarly, my provision requiring data sharing between CBP and the Coast Guard is streamlining interdiction in the southern maritime border, halting illegal incursions into the United States. In contrast to Democrat ambivalence about the border crisis, President Trump and congressional Republicans are making real gains in border security through the Coast Guard. In the last month, the Coast Guard interdicted an historic amount of illegal drugs. Just last week, it offloaded 37,000 pounds of seized cocaine, worth $279 million. That's going to make a real difference in keeping communities safe from criminals and addiction. But protecting Americans from deadly illicit narcotics extends beyond.
Welcome back to Conservative Chronicle. Today, I'm diving into some heated discussions from the Senate Commerce Committee. Ted Cruz just went off on the Biden administration and former DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, calling them out for deliberately ignoring the border crisis. But is he right? And what's really happening at our borders? Stay tuned because I'm breaking it all down right now. Before I dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the latest political updates. Let's start with what Ted Cruz is actually saying. In a recent Senate hearing, Cruz accused Mayorkas and Biden of ignoring the link between their open border policies and the explosion of drug smuggling, human trafficking, and crime. He argues their lack of enforcement is leading to more illegal immigration and putting an insane burden on the Coast Guard and law enforcement agencies across the country. And honestly, the numbers are backing him up. One of the biggest issues Cruz highlighted, the Coast Guard is stretched thin. Instead of focusing on stopping drug smugglers, they're being forced to chase down illegal immigrants. The Coast Guard admitted they've missed major drug bust opportunities because they are overwhelmed. Cruz says this is a direct result of Biden's policies. And get this, just last month, the Coast Guard intercepted 37,000 pounds of cocaine worth nearly $200
our borders. We also need to reverse the Biden administration's dangerous policies in the Middle East, where maritime drug running bankrolls Iran's malign activities. Coast Guard cutters recently caught advanced weapons originating in Iran and bound for the Houthis in Yemen, as well as hundreds of kilograms of methamphetamines, heroin, and other illegal drugs from Dow in the Arabian Sea. The Coast Guard and other federal agencies have been catching and releasing Iranian drug runners, meaning there was no consequence beyond losing cargo for financing terrorism. Let me be clear. Catch and release is a disgrace and an insult to those who've lost their lives to Iranian terrorism. That's why I've included language in the Coast Guard Reauthorization Act of 2025 to empower the Coast Guard and the Navy to respond forcefully to Dow's running drugs and weapons when they've helped finance Iranian terror. Under President Trump's leadership, we need to pass the Coast Guard Reauthorization Act and end the catch and release approach to Middle East drug enforcement. That legislation, which has broad bipartisan and bicameral support, would also close a loophole in the ability to prosecute cartels for drug smuggling on remotely operated drone ships, like the one in the hearing room today. We also need to enact the Pay Our Coast Guard Act, which I will reintroduce this week along with Senator Cantwell, Sullivan, Baldwin, Wicker, and Blunt-Rochester, to ensure that the Coast Guard is no longer the only armed service that goes unpaid during a government shutdown. As I've said before, the Coast Guard deserves to be paid without question and without delay. Finally, today we will hear powerful testimony from the unthinkable damage caused by illicit drugs like fentanyl to American families. Texan Jenna Elliger will testify about the effects this crisis had on her own family. I'm grateful she is here today as she works to turn tragedy into progress, and I look forward to hearing from Mrs. Elliger and the rest of our witnesses about what law enforcement needs to protect our communities. Another American lost to fentanyl is one too many. I know that Ranking Member Cantwell agrees with me on this point, and that's why we're working together on legislation to stop illicit fentanyl smuggling in the United States. I'm grateful for her partnership in this endeavor, and now turn to her for her opening statement.
Thank you, Ms.
$79 million. Imagine how much more is slipping through. But this issue goes beyond our borders. Cruz also pointed out how drug smuggling is funding Iran's terrorist activities. He blasted the Biden administration for their catch and release policy when it comes to Iranian drug runners. He says this not only fuels global terrorism, but also worsens the fentanyl crisis here in the U.S. This is where his critics say, why isn't the administration taking stronger action? So what's the solution? Cruz is pushing for new laws to stop cartel smuggling and to give the Coast Guard more power to go after drug runners. He also wants to ensure that the Coast Guard gets paid even during government shutdowns because right now, they're the only armed service left unpaid when the government runs out of money. What do you think? Should Congress take stronger action? Let me know in the comments. This border crisis is a huge issue, and it's not going away anytime soon. If you want to stay updated on the latest political battles and government policies, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss future videos. And if you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear the truth about the border crisis. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.